Hey, what's up, everyone? My name's Tyler. I'm a third year medical student at the University of Pittsburgh, and I'm happy to be talking to you guys today. I just want to say thanks to Melissa for asking me to come speak to you guys, and I'm just really sorry that I couldn't do this live in person. I'm on like the hardest rotation of medical school right now, and so I just can't get away from the hospital. During the time this meeting was scheduled for. But I'm super glad that you guys asked a lot of really good questions, and so I'll just try to answer them as completely as possible. But please reach out and send me any questions. You can find me on Instagram at Tyler Paris, just my name. And please ask as many questions as you want. I really will consider this whole talk a failure unless I get some questions from you guys, because that'll mean that I made you guys think, and that's really what I'm trying to do. So just getting started, I see a lot of these questions are about undergrad to start off. So just like some general background, like for me, like college, I pretty much just focused on getting into medical school. Like I was like really like serious about it, I guess, and I just really like enjoyed the game of it, and I enjoyed how it's the kind of game where you get to like accomplish things and like do all these like impressive things, but the way you achieve those things is by helping other people, doing good things for your community, and so I find that to be like a very fun way of growing, I guess. So that was pretty much all I did. I didn't really do anything a lot of people would like consider fun, just because I liked what I was doing. I liked the journey of getting into medical school. And so in terms of my GPA and MCAT score, which is the first question you guys asked, my GPA ended up being a 3.93 as a cellular molecular biology major, and my MCAT score was in the 99th percentile. And I think a lot of people a lot of people who don't know me super well just think I'm like super smart and stuff, but really what it was is I've just always been a learner kind of person. Growing up, I guess I still have 3 learning disabilities, and so pretty much what that turned into is me having to work extremely hard starting from like second grade or so, always studying. Like when other people are having fun, I was always learning new things, and so that kind of like I'm just used to always absorbing new information. Like even when I'm in medical school, even though I spend like 13, 14 hours studying medicine stuff, even in any moment of not studying, I'm always listening to like an informational podcast. I'm always learning about like money management, marketing, nutrition, like whatever. I'm always learning about something. And so learning is just part of my DNA now, I guess. And so I think that's why I can get such a high GPA and such a high MCAT score. Like I just don't get tired of absorbing more information. Yeah. And I think in terms of like academic advice of how to get that kind of GPA, that high of an MCAT score, I think a lot of times, especially in terms of the GPA, people just get their priorities a little mixed up. One of the things I do is I have a Premed mentoring group, I guess, at the University of Pittsburgh, and I meet with a bunch of students every week, and a lot of times people come to me and ask me like how they can get like the best research opportunities, how they can get ahead in the resume kind of aspects as like freshmen in college, as sophomores in college. And my answer for them is really to prioritize your GPA first, especially if you're a freshman in college. Your only job as a freshman in college is to get as high of a GPA as possible. Extracurriculars don't matter at all. And the reason that is because the GPA is the hardest thing to get, it's the most important thing to have, and it's also the hardest to recover from if something goes wrong. In the sense that if you're a freshman in college and you get a mix of A's and B's, like call it a 3.2 or something, you would need to get straight A's for 2 entire years after that just to get up to 3.7. And and a 3.7 is only like average for people who get into medical school. And so that's why you really don't want to emphasize things like resume kind of aspects in the beginning. You just want to focus on getting that GPA, because if you can get a high GPA early in your college career, it's extremely easy to get good research opportunities, good letters of recommendations, good volunteering opportunities in the second half of college, because you'll have the extra time that no one else has. And so that's the key to the good start in terms of the academic side of things. The MCAT, I see a lot of the later questions are about the MCAT, so I'll talk about that more later. But essentially, if you're just starting off in college, if you haven't taken the MCAT yet, you don't need to start studying for the MCAT until like 4 to 6 months ahead, let's say. You don't need to start studying years out. All you need to do is get the highest grade you can in the science classes, because that is studying for the MCAT. So prioritize that stuff, because those classes are double doozies in terms of they'll help your GPA and they'll give you a high MCAT score in the future if you prioritize those first. Second question is, did you volunteer in a research while you were an undergrad? If so, how many hours did you volunteer for a week? That's a great question. So like I said before, when I was in college, I focused on GPA and MCAT score first. So I didn't really know anything about like getting into medical school, and I'm kind of glad I didn't at the time, because it might have made me do things a little differently. But my first 2 years of college, I pretty much only had a high GPA, and then I got a high MCAT score. I took my MCAT after my sophomore year. And so I pretty much just had really good stats, which are pretty much the hardest part of the MCAT, or the medical school application. So I had the two most important things down first. And then I had all this extra time because I was already good at science classes. I already knew I was going to do well in them, and I didn't have to like worry about the MCAT anymore. I had time to do more of the volunteering stuff, more of the research stuff later on. So I didn't start doing research until my second semester of sophomore year. And it was only 4 hours a week. It was like super chill. I was just studying like it was like leaf surfaces or something, so not medically related, just trying to get myself acquainted to research, learn how to work the pipette and stuff. And then my junior year, I kept doing some research. I moved to rheumatoid arthritis lab, which is the thing I wanted to study in undergrad, because my mom has it. And I was still only doing I was still only doing 4 hours a week for my entire junior year. After my junior year, I got into a research program at Harvard Medical School to do more rheumatoid arthritis research. So that gave me like 400 more hours. And then senior year, I was really liking research at this point, and I thought I was pretty good at it. So I did a senior thesis project. I did an extra like 1,200 hours that year. So I think I averaged like 16 hours a week during my senior year. And then I also was doing clinical research on the side for an extra 4 hours a week. So that all summed up to 1,800 hours, which sounds like a lot compared to like a lot of other people in the medical school application cycle. But I just want you to understand that I didn't do any of it my first half of college. All I had coming out of my first half of college was a really high GPA and a really high MCAT score, and then everything else came really easy after that because I had the margin, I had the time to do it. And so that's what I recommend people do, just because it's intuitive, it's like logical, and it makes sense, and it's a lot simpler to focus on a couple big things at once than try to like build your entire like medical school application all at once. So I would recommend thinking about that. Why become a doctor and not a physician assistant? I've actually gotten this question a few times. The reason I wanted to be a doctor and not a physician assistant, like, I actually think like PA is probably like the best value of a degree in terms of the amount of training you have to do versus the amount of money you get paid. And so I think being a PA is probably like a great idea for like most people. It's probably even a good idea for most people, like, or a lot of people in medical school, just in the sense that like being a doctor takes a longer to train. Like you get paid a little bit more, but like there's more risk involved, and there's less like flexibility in terms of like how easy you can change your career once you like finish all your training and stuff. The reason I like needed to be a doctor instead of a physician assistant is because I like to be in charge. Like I like playing the game, like the intellectual game, like calling the shots, like testing out ideas, seeing what I think, seeing what works. And so I just wanted like that kind of like autonomy, that kind of like not authority, but like I just wanted the freedom to play the game that I wanted to play, and for that to happen, I needed to be a doctor. I think being a PA is a great job, though. What clubs was I involved in? Did you hold an officer position? Yeah, so I was like in the Premed club, and I had an office in that for like 2 years or something. I didn't find that to be a very valuable experience, just because like it seemed to be the kind of thing like people were doing with the intention of putting in as little work as possible. Like they just wanted to have the leadership on their resume, but they weren't actually trying to like create anything with that opportunity. So I didn't, and I was in that boat too. Like I wasn't trying to do anything special in that club either. So I don't think that was a super valuable experience for me. But what was a really valuable experience for me was I was a part of, it was called Street Health Outreach, and it was pretty much a homeless outreach program where groups of students would go into the city and like give out like socks, food, sandwiches to all the people without homes, and then you could like sit down and talk to them. A lot of times you would have like met them many times before, so they know who you are and stuff. And so you just get to kind of like talk to them, hear their stories, and so that was a great experience for me. I also got to be the leader of that program my junior year of college, and that turned into we were able to like triple the program in size. Get some more sponsorships, raise our budget. We also hosted like a homeless outreach training workshop for like people in junior high and high school, so that was awesome too. And I ended up winning a leadership award at my school for it. And so like that was the kind of opportunity where I was there not just to like have an office title. I was actually there trying to like create new things. I was trying to like grow the program because I believed in the mission of it. So those are the kinds of leadership opportunities that I think you should pay a lot more attention to. A lot of times people will always ask me, like, does XYZ look good to medical schools? And it's not about what looks good to medical schools, it's about what you do with it. Like, at the end of the day, the title does not matter, because when you write the application, you can say your title, but then you have to say what you did with the title. And if all it says is like I just like hosted some meetings or something that like everyone knows, that takes note work, those things like will get written off super quickly. But even if you take it very like not prestigious, not impressive, even if you start from absolutely nothing and build it to like a tiny thing, that looks more impressive because it shows initiative, it shows leadership. It's about what you do with the opportunity. It's not about how it's going to look. How it looks will depend on what you did with it. Next question is, how do you study for your prerequisite classes? It really depends on the class, obviously. In terms of like science classes, I'm a big... Compared to most other people, I take very few notes. I did take notes back then, though. And I would always have, like... So pretty much... I wish I had a piece of paper. But pretty much I had a line that went like down the side of my notebook. I'd take like little notes on this side, and then I had a box of like colored pencils, and I'd like draw mnemonic devices for each like concept, each equation, and that really helped me because like it's so hard. There's like so many things to remember in like biology and chemistry classes that like it's extremely challenging to try to learn it all just with like brute memory. And so what you need to do is you need to have some way to distinguish one trivial fact from the 10,000 other trivial facts you're trying to learn. And so for me, it turned into like drawing things. I'd like draw cats whenever there was cations in chemistry. I would draw like, I don't know, like little engines anytime there was a mitochondria, you know, some stuff like that, because that kind of stuff gives you some anchors to remember things by, and I think that helped me a lot. I'm also just a big fan of like practicing, so like especially in chemistry, when it's more like question based instead of just like rote memorization. What helped me a lot was doing like all the practice questions I had in like the chemistry book, and then doing them, doing the wrong ones over and over and over and over and over again until I could get it right like 3 times in a row or whatever. And so it really is not. It's not about doing them until you can get them right. It's about doing them until you can't get them wrong. And so that's the kind of mentality I took. It doesn't take that much longer because after like the second time of getting it right, it's pretty easy for you. But going through getting those mental reps in and just hammering those concepts in, hammering those patterns in, really helps when you're taking tests and like the concepts are like slightly off from what you practice, but you know them well enough that you can adjust and apply them again. So that's my advice for that. For non-science classes, I pretty much approach non-science classes the same way as science classes. English classes are always frustrating, but you don't have to take that many, so I don't think it's a big deal. But I hope that advice helps about creating little mnemonic devices that at least make things a little bit easier to remember. Next question. Oh my gosh. How many medical schools did you apply to? How many schools accepted and rejected you? So, okay. So the average number of medical schools people at my school applied to, I went to like a tiny liberal arts school. And our average was 15 schools. But then my friend went to UC Berkeley, which is like a big California school that's very competitive, and their average was 25 students. And so I said that I wanted to be like one better than them, so I applied to 26 schools. I ended up getting, so of those 26 schools, I applied to, the way I did it, because I had like such a high like GPA and MCAT score, and I had a lot of research, so I applied to like pretty much all of the top 20 medical schools. I pretty much just went by rank, straight down, all the way through like 25, and then I had some like extra, some like fallback schools ranked in like the 30s or something. And then of those 26 schools I applied to, I got 25 secondaries. The only school I didn't get a secondary from was UC Davis, which was actually the lowest ranked school on my list. So I don't really, I assume that they didn't give it to me because they didn't think I'd go there, but I have no idea. It's just weird. Like when you guys get to the application cycle, you'll see that like things just happen for no reason, or like it just feels like it's very like luck driven in a lot of ways. And once you start talking to like admissions deans, you'll kind of realize why that is. So I got 25 secondaries. I got 10 interviews. I got 9 interviews at top 25 schools, and so I'll talk about this a little later, but there's a reason for that. And the 10th school I got a interview from was Creighton, which is like it's like a Catholic school, I think. And the reason why my application cycle went like that, I ended up getting into the University of Pittsburgh, and I got rejected from the other schools, so it was a good thing I got in here. But pretty much, like, what happens in the medical school cycle is that there's 50,000 people applying, and everyone sees these like medical school like rankings or whatever, like who's like prestigious and who isn't, but they're like completely not they're largely not useful for in terms of actual like training experience of the students. And the reason is that those rankings are based off of research funding. Like 35% of the rank is research dollars that the school gets, which doesn't really transfer to actual like learning experience for the students. So that's why like Harvard is always number one. It's because they get $2 billion in research funding every year. And that's why Pitt's like number 13 or whatever, because we get 500, because, wait, what? I forget what we are, but we're like the fifth most funded school by the NIH or something, which obviously gives out a lot of the medical research funding. And so like because the ranking is not like based on actual like learning experience for the students a lot of times, the rankings themselves are like very arbitrary and like not actually useful for a lot of things that a medical school applicant needs to know. But the reason why I got 9 interviews at the top 25 schools was because my application was so research heavy. Like I had these stats, I had a lot of research, and then I had barely any like clinical volunteering. And so like it was just very clear that I wanted to be a research heavy kind of doctor. And so schools that want to produce research heavy doctors wanted to interview me. And so that's just how it worked out. And then the reason I got the interview at the Creighton School was because I come from a Christian liberal arts college where a lot of kids from my college end up going to medical school. And so they must have just seen like the tie and like figured they should send me or they could send me a interview invite. But that turned into a problem too, because even when I was at the Creighton interview, they looked at my application again, and my interviewer was like, "You're not going to come here, are you?" And I was like, "I mean, I'm here, so I'm thinking about it." And so like the schools can look at your application and they'll know what you want to do, because the way you spend your time is completely indicative of what kind of person you are and what kind of school should accept you. And so I did end up going to a heavy school, and this one service school, the Creighton School, that's highly service oriented, looked at me and was like, maybe like we're not a good fit, so go to research school. And that's a good way of looking at how to design your medical school application. It's not about doing things that you think the schools want you to do. It's about expressing yourself. It's about doing the things that you like to do intensely and really only focusing on those things that you like to do. You can do things that just like force you to check off boxes like shadowing, clinical volunteering, or like sometimes research or whatever, but 90% of the time you spend should be on things you like to do. Because at the end of the day, the schools are going to look at you and they're all thinking, which students are the best fit for my school? My school has a special mission, whether it's to produce research-heavy doctors, whether it's to serve underserved communities. Each school has a very specific thing they're looking for, and you're trying to express yourself in the best way, in the most complete, truest way, most well-developed sense of what you want to do in medicine, so that when those schools see your application, they think this person is the right person for my school. And that's pretty much my philosophy for the extracurricular part of the application. Applying to medical school. Did you use the committee letter at your school? Will it look bad if I do not use the committee letter service? Well, I guess my question is, why would you not use it? I've heard some people at some schools like have bad experiences, but I did use the committee letter at my school, and I think it was really helpful because, like, at least at my institution, like, it turned into, like, the, like, pre-med advisor who I knew well, like, wrote, a composite letter saying, like, all these great things that all my other letter writers said. And so, like, it seemed like a very positive thing. I think it was helpful. but I've heard of some reasons that people don't use it, but I'd say if you could use it, then you should. Recommendation letters. How many recommendation letters did you have? When should I start collecting my letters of recommendation? I had the most you could submit. I had so my letters of recommendation, I think there was like 6 or something. I think that's the limit. But I had my PI, the professor I did research with, who wrote me a really good letter. Then I also had another professor I did research with who wrote me another really good letter. Then my non-science professor was a business professor who also wrote a nice letter. And then the 4th one was a doctor who I did research with. The 5th one was another professor I did research with, the one I was at Harvard Medical School with. And then the 6th one was the president of my school, who I happen to know. And so, like, all that to say, like, in terms of the common theme behind those 6 letters was that they all knew me in a context where I could display a skill. And I think that's the most important thing in my mind. Like research, like 4 or 5 of those people saw me in like a research context, and they got to see that like I was like the hardest working student they ever had. Like I had the best like original ideas kind of stuff. And so like those kinds of things like show up in the letters, and if they have like a specific like story or experience or specific instance where you display those abilities, they can put that directly into the letter, and that just like builds the support that you have these like character aspects. I think it's very challenging when people get letters of recommendations from doctors they shadow, because shadowing is not a skill. Like you can't be good at shadowing. Like the doctor can't write like this was the best pre-med shadowing student I ever had, because shadowing is not something you get good at. So I think there's a lot of value in getting letters from like professors whose classes you did well in, people who you worked for in like a volunteer setting and you like started something or like were the best volunteer they ever had. Like you want that to come out of their mouth. Like someone who can honestly say that you're the best person they've ever worked with. Because good letters of recommendation, like when people say they have like a good letter of recommendation, like those are a dime a dozen, because people just ask some professor they like barely even knew, and then they like give them some like scripted letter that professors also submitted to medical schools for like 100 other people. So there's just like nothing original about it. So you're really looking to like cut through the BS with a really good letter written by someone who knows you really well in a context that shows that you are impressive and display like real abilities. So that's my recommendation for letters of recommendation. I'd also say that the letters of recommendation are probably like one of the most undervalued parts of the medical school application cycle, because like people like struggle to get them, especially like it can't even be harder for like more quiet people, especially like people like me. Like I really struggled to get my non-science letter recommendation because I just wasn't as interested in like non-science classes. But it can be challenging for people to get, but they're a huge opportunity, because having like professors, having doctors, having like business people saying that you're like the best they ever had in this or this context, that's worth a lot more than you saying it yourself in the personal statement. So if they say stuff that's good about you in the personal statement, I mean, in their letters of recommendation, and then you say the same things in your personal statement, like that's like real. Like then the school is like, this guy is like the real deal, or this girl is the real deal. So that's how I frame letters of recommendation. When should you start asking professors if they could write a letter for you? I would, so like, the idea that you're talking about is pretty much like, if I have someone who I want to write a letter for me, but like, let's say like they teach like sophomore organic chemistry or something, and you're not going to see them again for another 2 years when you actually need the letter, and you're wondering like, should I ask them to write now or should I ask them to write later? What I would do is I would just go into their office hours or email them or whatever and say like, hey, Dr. So-and-so, like, I really thought that, like, we worked together well in this class. I loved learning whatever, or let's say it's a research professor, like, I loved working in this lab with you. Like, I learned a lot. Thank you for the opportunity. Like, and I'm interested, like, I would like to, like, I'm planning on applying to medical school. It would be great if you could write me a letter of recommendation. And then I would just ask them if they want to write it now or write it later. And just let them decide, because, you know, it would be nice if they wrote it immediately so that they don't, like, forget the stories that would otherwise go in a good letter of recommendation. But you also, like, you know, you want to do stuff the way that they want to do it. So I would just ask and see what their personal opinion is. I'm pretty sure it'll be a mixed bag, but definitely a good thing to ask. Yeah. Personal statement questions. How did you approach writing your personal statement? So just to like frame the context, the personal statement is part of the medical school application. I think it's like a 5,200 word essay, so like about a page and a third, single spaced. Pretty much explaining why you want to be a doctor, and it's probably like the most difficult, probably the most surprisingly difficult part of the entire cycle. And the reason it's difficult is because like a lot of people haven't really like thought of it super well of why they actually want to be a doctor. That's other than I like science and helping people. But I think coloring in the I like science and helping people answer with specific examples and like character traits that you've shown over the years in different contexts is very challenging for people, especially since like we're not, like, people who apply to medical school are not usually like great writers. We're usually better at science stuff, and so I think it can be very challenging. My approach to it, so pretty much it took me about a month to write my personal statement, just because like you start off with like this like 7-page paper life story about yourself, and then like over time you're trying to cut it down, trying to like get under the word limit, which is like really challenging because there's always more you want to say, but you need to keep cutting because they might not read the whole thing. So that was my approach. I spent like a month, and it started off really huge and then progressively like slid under the word limit. But I think it's very important to give yourself the full month, because everyone I know took a month to write their personal statement. Like, everyone thinks it's like a week-long thing, but then you kind of write up your first draft and you're like, wow, this is terrible. So you like throw it away. Then you get like this decent, like super long, messy thing, and you have to like cut it down. And that actually does take weeks, because you could go days without a good idea. Like, you could go days without improving it at all, but you got to keep chopping. You got to keep like refining ideas, making them more concise. And so giving yourself a lot of time to do it is my number one piece of advice. What information did I include? So there's a few good ways to write a personal statement. My personal statement was about pretty much how I had like the character attributes of a good doctor. And so pretty much I talked about how I was a hard worker who liked to learn a lot, and then I told the story about like my learning disabilities, how I still like did really well in school and stuff, and how like that developed like grit and perseverance and stuff, which is honestly like the number one quality of a good doctor. Once you get to medical school, you'll kind of see why. And then the second paragraph was about like compassion and like building relationships with like underserved communities. So I talked about like this guy I met, one of the people my team would always see during our like homeless outreach sessions. So we'd like talk to him every week. So I talked about like an injury he went through and how my team was able to like help him get in contact with like doctors and stuff, and we were able to like give him bandages for his wounds and stuff. And then the third paragraph was about like research and how I have this like, how I'm very like good at research and good at like self-starting projects and like being very like technical in my execution of those kinds of things. And so the idea was that like you take these three like big character traits, put them together, and that's pretty much what you'd want in a doctor. And so that's why. And then the reason I wanted to be a doctor was because it fit my skills. It's something I would be good at, something I was passionate about, and something I had meaning in. And I think that's pretty much what people should have in any career they choose to go into. What information did I not include? I mean, you just pick your best stories. Like, you probably will end up picking your 3 best stories to put into your personal statement. I think what this question brings up pretty well is, like, this idea that, like, diseases or, like, disabilities are, like, a red flag to medical schools. And I get why people think that, but, like, I actually, I just said that, like, in my personal statement, I said that I have learning disabilities that pretty much make it hard for me to take up large volumes of information quickly. And so to a medical school, like, that's probably, like, one of the bigger red flags there are, in terms of, like, is this guy going to make it through the curriculum? And so, like, I did it, and I was very confident in that was the right thing to do. And I think it is the right thing to do for most people, especially if it comes with a story. Like, I got a message from someone the other day who had, what was it? She had Crohn's disease, which is, it's an inflammatory bowel disease. And it, like, made her drop out of school one semester. And I was like, and she was asking if that would be a red flag. And I said, no, it wouldn't be a red flag. It's only a red flag if you, like, use it as an excuse, pretty much. Because then she went on to tell me that, like, she's really passionate about going into, like, GI or gastrointestinal medicine. She does, like, research in it. She does some, like, volunteering in, like, Crohn's disease awareness or something. And so, like, that interpersonal statement is a great thing, actually, because it, like, gives a really concrete idea of why she wants to go into medical school. She wants to go into it because she has this condition. It helps her empathize with people who have it in a way that, like, I couldn't do myself, obviously. And she also displays her interest in going into it by doing research in it and by volunteering in those kinds of, like, societies or organizations and stuff. So, like, that is a really powerful personal statement, and I wouldn't worry about, like, the red flagginess of it, because it's more important to show, like, actual, like, reasons you want to go into medicine, actual, like, passions, than, like, try to hide your insecurities about your condition just because you think it might negatively affect you, So in that sense, I wouldn't worry about conditions like that. How do I start my personal statement early? Do they release the prompts in advance? Yes, the prompt does not change. It is just, why do you want to be a doctor, pretty much. And that's it. You just start writing. I think it's, at least for me, because I'm, like, semi-lazy in this kind of way, like, it's very hard for me to start writing something, especially unless it's under a time crunch, just because, like, I don't really, like, enjoy writing inherently, and so, like, I need, like, the pressure that it needs to get done in order for me to actually take it seriously. And so, like, yeah, I mean, you should start writing it early in, like, May if the applications cycle starts in June, and if you can, that's great. Any tips when applying to medical schools? My biggest tip, like, a general question demands a general answer. I think Aristotle said that. And so my biggest tip for applying to medical schools is to make your application reflect who you are as a person. And that's it. Like, don't pander to medical schools. Don't do things you think they want you to do, even if you don't, like, don't do things you think they want you to do, especially if you don't like them. Because A, you are not going to be good at something you don't like. B, you don't like it. So you're going to be you're just going to be garbage at it. And so, like, spend as much time doing the things you actually like, even if it's not things that you really would consider classic pre-med activities. Because if you do anything at a super high level, it will always be appreciated by the admissions committees. Like, you think, like, no one would ever, like, tell a pre-med student to become the best like ping pong player in the world. But if you got an application from the best ping pong player in the world who, wanted to go into medicine, like that would be a huge plus, because the only like 3 kinds of people who actually are associated with becoming good doctor, better doctors than average or whatever, are like athletes, musicians, parents. And the reason it's those 3 categories is because they're all things that require you to have a lot of determination and grit. And so anything you can do in any context, no matter if it's related to medicine or not, anything that displays that kind of endurance, that stuff is always a differentiator between you and everyone else who's applying, because most of them are just pandering to the medical schools. They're not doing things they like, and they're not doing it at intense levels. The MCAT. How did you study for the MCAT? I self-studied for the MCAT. The books I used were the Berkeley Review. Like, I highly recommend them, because they're like very detailed, and so they'll like teach you like probably way more than you need to know for the MCAT. But that's really good for me because I'm a very like big picture kind of person, and so I tend to like skim over the details more often than not. And so having a very detailed book helps a lot, because if you have way too many details and you remember half of them, then you probably know all the details you actually needed in the first place. And so like my recommendation for big picture thinkers is to have like a very detailed resource that you're studying from. It doesn't turn out very well when like I, as a big picture thinker, use a very big picture kind of book that's very like general, because like then I come away with all these big pictures, but I have absolutely no details to like actually use for that come into play for a lot of the questions. So that's why I like detailed books. How many hours a day did I study? I think I averaged 5.5 hours a day for 14 weeks. And so that came out to 580 hours, which is it's a good amount, especially for someone in undergrad. And it's just about having high quality hours it's about prioritizing quality over quantity, first of all. So for me, like 5 hours is like that's like when I'm at my highest efficiency, I'd say. So I think that's why it turned out to be that much time. How do you improve the car section? The car section really sucks, especially for me because I'm dyslexic and don't read very well. And I also just don't like verbal reasoning. But like I was very fortunate. I actually scored in the 99.7th percentile of that test. So pretty much I was like 1 in 300 people for that section, so which is pretty good. And so what happened was like I was really terrible at it for the first like 3 months. For the first 12 of my 14 weeks, I was absolutely trash at it. And so, but what happened was like I was so bad. I was in like the 70th percentile, but I knew I wasn't just gonna get to the 90th percentile just by like working harder using the strategy I was using, because like it was so trash. But so what I did was every week I would choose a different strategy to use, and I'd like do practice questions every day. I'd do like 2 passages a day or something, and I'd like write down my scores every day. I'd like keep track of like which techniques were working the best. And I said that once I got a technique that would get me over the 80th percentile, I would stick with that one forever. And so that's pretty much what happened. Like I went like 12 weeks pretty much with like no improvement whatsoever. And in the 12th week, I was on SDN reading this thread. This dude was like destroying the practice test, and someone asked him how he was handling the car section, and he gave his technique. And so I tried it out, and I got into the 80th percentile. And then in the next coming weeks, I just got better and better and better at it. And so that's how I ended up getting in the like 100th percentile or whatever. And so the idea is that you can't know which technique is going to be best for you at the offset. And so it's very important to start off from the beginning, doing practice questions and trying different techniques every week and keeping track of how each one's treating you, so that you know when to stop and commit to one strategy for a long time. and take that one to the highest percentiles. The strategy that ended up working for me was I would read the introduction paragraph, and then I'd read the conclusion paragraph, then I'd read the entire paragraph, the whole passage together. I would sum up the passage in one sentence, and then I would completely forget everything I had read from the passage other than my one sentence, and then I would answer every question only according to the one sentence. Which takes a lot of guts because, a lot of people like underlining stuff and like keeping track of like every single thing the author says. But the one sentence strategy worked for me because it requires you to like synthesize all the information at once, and then just keep applying it to the questions, and it works really well for me. You really need to know what your strengths are. So like I've always been very good at synthesizing information, and that's pretty much what my strategy like demands from people. But everyone's going to be on a gradient. Some people probably are better off like highlighting and underlining things, but I'm just offering that strategy in case someone can benefit from it. What methods do you use for each sections? The biology and physical science sections. So for the biology, my methods for the biology sections and chemistry sections are pretty similar in the sense that I think it's always about anticipation of what the question is going to be. Because when you are reading the questions, when you're reading the passage, I think it helps a lot to think about what questions could possibly come up. Because it's always going to be a combination of two of the concepts that's in the passage. So like if you get like a fluid hydraulics kind of question plus like an electricity component, like you better start thinking about how like fluid and electricity can go together. And I think that as I started doing that more and more and started like thinking of like, oh, what if they ask this, what if they ask this, like as I'm reading the passages, that ended up helping a lot because I got better at predicting them. And so once I saw the question, I was like, I've already thought about this, bam. I've already thought about this, bam. And so that reflex kind of like helped me go a lot faster, and it helped me like just anticipate, get more questions right. So that's my first recommendation. In terms of chemistry, I think math really destroys a lot of people on the MCAT, especially the ones that I've tutored. And what helps me a lot in terms of math is that the first thing I do is I always guesstimate. Like I'm just a habitual guesstimator, especially like in the grocery store and stuff. I always like, if I like buy 3 things that are $2.73 or whatever, like I'll always instantly guess like, okay, it's going to be about $7.50 or something like that. And like I think that reflex really helps me like get a sense of like what kind of answers an equation can spit out that would be fairly close, right? Like my guess that 3 things that are $3.73 would cost $7.50 is not actually that close if you put it in the calculator, but because I guess a little bit, and because I have that instinct, if I did the calculation and it turned out to be like 5, I would know that I made a math mistake, because it's just the answer I got is insane compared to what it should have been per my guesstimate. And as you get better at guesstimating, my goal is always to guesstimate within 5% of what the actual value is. And if you do get that good at guesstimating and spend a lot of time in the grocery store practicing, you won't need to use a calculator on the exam, because most answer options are more than 5% different from each other. And so when I took the MCAT, I didn't use any calculators. I just do the math in my head. It takes too long for me to write out the math and the equations. So it's just always fast for me just to think it up. And as long as I'm within 5%, like it's going to be right. The other math tip I have just quickly is to always work with extremes. So like there's always, for a lot of things on the MCAT, there's always like a linear trend or a inversely linear trend, or a direct correlation or an indirect correlation. And so because like all the correlations are going to be like straight lined and not like hyperbolic or something, you can always, if you need to know what is going to happen when a variable changes in an equation, all you need to do is think about what if the variable was 0 and what if the variable was 1,000,000. That's all I do. Like, I don't need to think about equation, or I don't need to think about like plugging in like little numbers from like the actual passage or whatever. If you just know what happens at 0 and 1,000,000, that tells you the direction of the trend. And so it's a lot easier to pick the correct answers in that context. Both of the skills I just talked about take a lot of practice. So I hope that me telling it to you helped a lot, but understand that these things they're skills. They take a lot of practice. They need to become a reflex for them to actually be helpful. Medical school questions. Did your study methods change when you went to medical school? Yeah, they did a lot, actually, and the reason is because I never used flashcards before medical school, because, I don't know, I always thought teachers, like, look down on flashcards because they, like, just make you into, like, a rote memorizer or something. So a lot of my classmates came in not using flashcards at all, but by the end of second year, we all use flashcards heavily. Like, I use flashcards for, like, 95% of my learning now, because like you just can't hold all of the information you need to know for medical school by just reading notes over and over again. Like, you need an intelligent system like Anki that has like the scheduling to it to tell you when you need to review something, because you can't review everything every day. So you just need the flashcards. You need something testing you all the time to tell you what you know, what you don't know. So that's the biggest change I've had, is the use of spaced repetition, the use of flashcards. And that's the number one thing I recommend undergrad students start practicing. A, because it's going to make you better in your classes now, and B, that's how all the medical students study. So it's funny. Did you go straight to medical school? If you took a gap year, what did you do in your gap year? I took one gap year. Because it just made everything a lot easier. It made my application a lot better because I could count the things I did during my senior year of college. And it was just a good break to like do things other than just study all the time. And so what I did, the summer of my gap year, I went back to Harvard Medical School to do more research, and I ended up getting a paper out of that, so that was super clutch. And then the other part I did was I worked for a company that sells military aerospace equipment. And I did that because, like, I always kind of thought, like, I would be good at, like, business-related things, and so I wanted to see if I could work, like, a normal desk job. But I can't work a normal desk job. Like, I just don't find it, like, as interesting. Like, I'd rather just sit at a desk and learn stuff than, like, sit at a desk and do normal job kind of things, I guess. Because, like, the intellectual stimulation is really, like, everything to me. How is medical school different from undergrads in terms of studying for classes, exam students? So in terms of studying for classes, like, the classes are a lot harder now, and the people who you're studying with are a lot smarter now. And so that's the biggest difference. I studied, in undergrad, I studied for about 50 hours a week, probably, outside of classes. Actually, 50 hours a week is what 50 productive hours a week is probably what I was doing in undergrad. In medical school, it's more like 70 to 75, which is kind of a lot. Like, it actually gets hard. It's very challenging for me to get above 70 hours a week without getting into, like, time crunches pretty frequently. The students are really nice. I really like the students at my school because, like, we all have very, like, different skills. Like, you'd probably call me, like, a pretty classic, like, pre-med in terms of, like, the things I did. But a lot of people have, like, very diverse interests. Many things, like, outside of medicine, sports, like, politics, like, whatever. Like, and I really appreciate that diversity. That's why I recommend a lot more people try to be that kind of diverse, contribute that kind of diversity to the class, because I kind of realized there's not a whole lot of people who just, like, did, you know, the classic GPA research volunteering. Like, a lot more people have something outside of that sets them apart additionally. So think about that. I have a learning disability. Will medical school be harder for me? So, like, you know, obviously I have that same problem times 3. It's not, so it's a game of self-awareness. That's what it comes down to. And so pretty much for me, like I got here and I remember I was studying in the library during anatomy, which is our first class, and I was doing the exact same thing as my friend, and like we would study the same amount in the same places, and like we were just reading the syllabus together and like doing the exact same things. And like she scored a 98 on the test and I got like an 85 or something on the test. And so like I just realized like the things I'm doing, like I'm not getting the same out as someone else who's doing the exact same thing. And so like I just was like very committed to like not settling on a studying strategy until I was able to get those same kinds of returns as she was getting. And so pretty much what I did, I just was like, my school is pass-fail the first 2 years, so your grades in the actual classes don't matter. You just need to get a high board score. And so pretty much I was just like, I'm just going to like burn my first 2 years of medical school, and I'm just committed to finding the style that works for me, because if I can find that special technique, that special system, I could go twice as fast and I could make up any ground I lost during the times I sucked. And so I pretty much did the same thing as I did for the cars section of the MCAT that I talked about earlier, where I would do one system, one learning system or whatever, one collection of materials per class, and I just see how my score turned out, and then I change to something else, and then I see how that score turned out, then I change to something else. And I was just waiting until I like actually did well on a test. And then once I did at the very beginning of my second year, I just stuck to that one, and I was able to do well in all the future classes my second year, but at the same time like go back and review past classes I had done poorly on, so that by the time we started studying for our board exam, which tests you on everything from the first 2 years of medical school, I was like super set. Like I just knew a lot, because in that second year of medical school I had reviewed everything from the first 2 years. And so like that's what I think having a learning disability comes down to. It's about playing the long game. Like you're not, like if you're a little slower, you will never be the best. It will be extremely challenging for you to be the best in the short term, because things are changing all the time, and the way that the school is set up is not going to be the ideal way for you to learn. And so you need to invest time into figuring out how you're going to take this situation, how you're going to get all this information in your head in a way that probably most people don't use themselves, so you're going to have to come up with it. But if you do invest the time to figuring all those things out, you could do very well. And that's just the major thesis of my studying advice, is especially if you have a learning disability, to invest heavily up front in developing your system, because if you figure it out, you can go so much faster and catch up in the later half. And that certainly has worked well for me. How does medical school grade me? We don't really, like the first 2 years of medical school, you don't get grades at my school, which is like a really good thing to look for in a school, because it like reduces competition between the students. And it allows you, like if there were grades in my medical school, I would not have been able to do what I just said and like not care about how my grades were for the first year when I was trying to figure myself out. But because my school is nice enough that we don't have grades, I was able to do that. But I certainly know someone, actually I know 3 someones who don't go to pass-fail schools, and they have a lot of trouble because they can't experiment without taking a hit to their grades. And that is sad. Do you attend class? Oh, do you have to attend class? Oh, the answer is no. So like I don't attend any class. And I also don't use any class material at my medical school. So I'm completely in the wind. And that's just worked better for me, because like there's just too much to learn at once. Like no one can memorize 300 pages a week. You know, like that's just not realistic. And to say on top of that you have to review things that you learned 18 months ago on top of that 300 a week, like that's pretty much impossible. And so like for me, it was about like finding resources I could use that like simplify that information and made it manageable for me to like go back and review the old stuff so I wouldn't forget it, because I knew I would need it again. Very few people at my medical school go to class. I think by the end of my second year, it was only like 5 people out of 150. Like it's really not a thing. Last question. What do you do in your clinical rotations? How do medical school grade you? That's a great question. What do? I pretty much try. My goal every day is to try to be a resident. Pretty much. That's pretty much what I do. It's very hard because I have way less knowledge than the actual residents, and I'm like generally just disoriented, and it's quite challenging. Because it's like I'm at a big hospital system. So like all of our patients are like extremely complex. Like everyone at the hospital I'm in right now has like 2 organ transplants, and that just like complicates things like crazy. And so like pretty much what we do is every day we get at the hospital. I get there at like 7 right now. It's pretty easy. See our patients, talk to them, see what's wrong with them, try to develop a plan for them. We go on rounds later that morning, talk about all the patients, develop our plans, and then in the afternoon we spend a lot of time like writing notes and like sorting everything out, making sure all the patients like get all their tests done and all that stuff. But it's a lot of fun. I really enjoy the thinking side of it. I think it's really interesting to get to like see all the information you've accumulated over the years and get to like actually apply it to like actual people, and you get to actually say like, should we give this drug because it has like this like interaction with like this molecule in the liver, like will that interfere with like this drug, or like you get to like talk a lot about the theory, like stuff you didn't think was important when you were actually learning it, but now it's actually like affecting people's lives. So it's pretty cool. How do they grade me? The grading is like a lot more subjective than before because like it's a lot more of like the attendings talking about how they think you did. And all right, so that's all the questions we have for today. The last thing I want to say, just to kind of sum up my fundamental advice to all of you, is that if you want to be a good medical school applicant, it comes down to focusing on the GPA and the MCAT first, getting those down, because those things are the hardest to correct if they go wrong, and they're the biggest advantages if you can get them to go right. Get those down first. Then the second half that comes later is focusing on those extracurriculars. And those are more about telling a story about who you are as a person and just the things you like to do, pretty much. Don't spend time pandering to medical schools. Don't spend time doing things that you think they want you to do. Because really, at the end of the day, what they want to see in your application is who you are and what makes you exceptional. And the only way you're going to show who you are and what makes you exceptional is if you spend time doing things that you really like to do. Even if they're things not really related to medicine. If you just display a ability to do things in a different way and take things to a high level, that is all you need to really show to medical schools. You should shadow a little bit, you can check off those boxes, but by and large, all of those hours should go into building yourself up, developing the skills you want to develop, studying the things you want to study, and doing the extracurriculars that are the things that you would do even if you didn't get anything out of them other than just the pleasure of doing them. And so I'm a huge believer in that, and I think we need more of that in the pre-med environment. And I believe in it so much that I'm even offering the students in my the group I talk to every week, I'm offering them $200 to start up any after school program they want to, any socially beneficial program that they want to start that aligns with some passion they have. I will fund that with the money I make from tutoring and stuff, because I think that's what the world needs more of. And so I really encourage you guys to take that kind of approach as well, and it'll work out super well for you. So yeah, that's it from me. Please let me know if you have any questions. You can find me on Instagram at Tyler Paris. And yeah, hit me up with any questions. Like I said in the very beginning, I will consider this entire talk a failure if I don't get any questions from you guys. So yeah, please send some. All right, thanks. Bye.